Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to I'm Working Late. We have another guest episode today. We have another guest. Welcome, Chloe.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. So, Chloe, you've got pageant background. That's the way I want to start this. She has pageant background.
Pageant background.
You can tell by your beautiful hair.
You know what? I literally did this in about 3 minutes in the loos at work.
No,
I think
honestly,
that's probably one of the things that pageants do give you is an innate ability to get ready in insane time pressures.
Yeah. Quick time. Honestly, your hair is gorgeous. I love it. For the audio only, I would recommend coming for the visual. But yeah, so just as a brief touch on that, real estate lawyer.
Yes.
Real estate, Chloe is a real estate lawyer, but also, which I find so interesting, former Miss Universe finalist, Miss International finalist, and Miss Galaxy Scotland.
And now retired. Yes. So I have competed in beauty pageants almost as long as I've wanted to be a lawyer, which is really strange because obviously in the first instance, the two just don't seem to have any kind of, they don't seem to operate symbiotically whatsoever. But yes, I was Miss Galaxy Scotland in 2018. And then I retired to focus on my law degree, the LPC, etc., etc. And then in some stroke of madness in 2023, the first half of that year, I decided that I was going to compete in Miss Universe Great Britain. I ran the London Marathon, I finished the LPC, and I started my training contract all within like an 8-month period.
Oh my God.
Placed at Miss Universe Great Britain, thought that I wasn't finished with competing. I entered Miss International UK. I was super excited. And then I realised when I got offered time to count by my previous firm that the international finals, which is held in Japan every year, would coincide with when I was due to qualify. So I think I am a little bit, I'm just a girl. I definitely believe in things like signs. I'm just a girl. I definitely believe in signs from the universe. And I kind of took that as, do you know what? It's time to put a big pause on this chapter and focus on what I've spent what feels like my entire life dreaming about, which was qualifying as a solicitor. So at 28 years old, I am in pageant retirement.
She's retired, guys. So you've kind of touched on it there, but how did you kind of go from beauty pageants to the legal career, as in they were simultaneous for a while until you decided to say, right, I'm just going to stick with law for now?
Yeah, I think for a long time, throughout pretty much the entirety of my kind of older teenage years, early 20s, I did try and do both. So I started competing when I was, I think, 16 years old, and I actually used it as a way to make friends, and make friends I did. The girls that I'm friends with now are genuinely some of the most objectively impressive women you could ever meet, and we've, there's been weddings, there's been babies, there's been graduations. So I set out with an objective, and I kind of achieved that and then some. I've wanted to be a lawyer for forever and a day, so sticking in at school and doing well academically has always been at the top of my priority list. However, we're no strangers to how competitive the legal sector is. And I think one of the things that pageantry afforded me was the opportunity to just be more than academics. It taught me the importance of community service. It taught me the importance of standing up for causes that you believe in, and to giving back. I've raised, I think, around £10,000 for charity, which, on top of working full time, on top of a law degree, a master's degree, etc., I think is a pretty objectively cool achievement. And, doing things like running the marathon, etc., I don't think I would have been galvanized to push myself as far out of my comfort zone had it not been for pageants. And I also think, like law, pageantry is a hugely competitive environment. You know, you have girls like me that would spend hours in dance studios training, that would spend hours with interview coaches refining their interview skills, and being able to compete without falling victim to comparison culture. Again, it lends itself to the legal sector. So I think throughout my early years, I felt like I was building the foundations in both worlds. And, you know, again, it got to a point, so this same point has kind of happened twice, where when I started my law degree, I had just finished my year as Miss Galaxy Scotland. I'd competed in the USA, I'd travelled the length and breadth of England, Scotland and Wales, and I kind of thought, okay, let's have a break. And I knew at that point I wasn't really done. I would come back, but I wanted to accomplish, you know, the number one goal, which was graduating with a first. That was something that I'd set myself, and that's what I wanted to do. So instead of competing, I founded my interview coaching enterprise. So every so often I would coach women and girls from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, and help them refine their interview skills in the context of pageants. So still very heavily involved. Finished my law degree, got the first that I really wanted. In that time, I was offered my training contract, and I kind of felt like I knew the lay of the land with my previous firm, who had always expressed, I think, a real positive interest in my double life, we'll call it. So when the opportunity came around for Miss Universe Great Britain 2023, I had a conversation and they said, yes, we'll sponsor you. And they very kindly did that. And I was very grateful for them for doing that, because from there, you know, I featured in Legal Cheek. I ended up in the Times newspaper, which I think probably like one of the most insane phone calls I've ever had, and I think I ever will have. And again, after I'd competed at Universe, apart from when I thought, you know, I will do Miss International UK, when I realised the timings and how it was going to cross over with qualification, I thought, do you know what? No, I'm really happy with what I've been able to achieve here. I'm really happy with the effect that this has had on not only my personal life, but my professional life. So let's hang the heels up for now. And again, I think taking that into a career context, you know, I've just moved firms. And I think similarly, it got to that point where I was like, I'm ready to take the next step. I'm ready to start a new chapter. And I think pageantry, again, has given me the means and the ability to be quite self-aware, live to my personal circumstances, and, you know, to understand that goals and goalposts are ever moving. So it's okay to get to one goal and go, right, okay, this is brilliant. I'm now going to move on, but with an innate sense of appreciation for what chapter you've just closed. Yeah,
that was a brilliant answer. That was the best answer ever. Think that I might have done this before. No, that next question really well. You're very good at interviews. Interviewing skills. I didn't realise that would be part of like a pageantry coaching process. How much weight do they place on an interview?
Oh, it's huge and it's really scary. I think going into a room where you've got between 5 and sometimes up to crazy amounts, like 10 sets of eyes on you, and you've got between 3 and 5 minutes to convince all of those people that you are the girl for the job, is a skill that I am very glad to have acquired, but one that has taken me years and years and years, and more times of trial and error than I'd care to admit. In fact, I remember 17-year-old me, in fact, it was the day before my 18th birthday, and I actually lost this pageant. So that was an interesting time. I remember going into the interview room and I had trained and I had worked and I'd put the hours in, and I thought, I'm so ready for this. And the judges one of the judges said, Chloe, what's your most embarrassing moment? And as a 17-year-old, you have plenty. Looking back, I can think of at least 10. Don't ask me that question, Holly, because I can't answer now. And I remember sitting there just going, oh my goodness, I haven't prepared for this at all. I wanted to talk about, going on to do my law degree and being a lawyer and all of that good stuff. And I just sat there and I just went, now that is probably one of my most embarrassing moments. But I think pageant interview training is not just training a skill for that set of circumstances. Every single job interview I've trained like it's been, I've prepared like it's been a pageant interview. It teaches you how to get to the crux of an answer. It teaches you body language. It teaches you building rapport. And again, going back to what I mentioned before, it teaches you to appreciate what you're good at and what you bring to the table, which in a competitive environment counts for so much. The last thing you want when you're interviewing for any job, whether it's a place on a VAC scheme, a training contract, your NQ position, or whether, like me earlier this year, you're moving firms, the last thing you want is to be sat outside an interview room, not being able to appreciate what you bring to the table and why you deserve that opportunity. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from my time in pageants, is knowing that if an opportunity it presents itself to me, being able to identify why that fits, why I'm the right person, and being able to convey that without knocking others down, without comparing myself to others, and building rapport with my interviewers that way is such an underrated skill.
How do you think you decided or selected to go into the area that you're in now? So how did you narrow it down to think, I'm going to go into residential property?
I fell into property completely by accident. And I think if you ask any property lawyer, whether it's resi development, general commercial property or real estate or residential conveyancing, chances are they will probably tell you the exact same thing. However, when I say it was an accident, I actually applied for the wrong job. So I got my first legal role through my university's placement service. Okay. And for the listeners, I could not be a bigger advocate for placement years. It transformed my life. But my university had actually advertised the role in my previous firm's clinical negligence department. So I had drafted this cover letter. I spent hours. I completely reformatted my CV. And the practice manager at the time calls me and says, we're really keen to speak to you, but just to let you know, the role is in conveyancing. Is that going to be okay? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, land law, really? But also at the time, it's your first legal role. You're not going to say no. So no, of course, I'm so ready for this. When can I come in and interview? And as luck would have it, land law at university is an interesting subject because it is absolutely nothing like property law in practice. I felt like I'd kind of grasped a lot of the foundation concepts that I actually now rely on every single day. So I thought, you know what, we're just going to go for it. And I did the interview and I was offered the role. And then after that, it was kind of a case of treating my placement year like it was a long-term job interview. So I had a 15-month placement year and I started in July 2019. And for those of you that are doing the maths, that meant that I finished my placement year during COVID and I was working in property at the time. And after COVID came the first stamp duty holiday. So for my final year of my degree, I juggled working, finishing my degree online, and in that time I was fortunate enough to be offered my training contract. And at the time I think I was interested in family, I think I was interested in a bit of employment, corporate, and I kind of thought, no, I know that I definitely do not want to be a property lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I did my first seat in residential conveyancing. So by that time, I think it was 4.5 years I'd been doing residential conveyancing, and I thought I'd had my fill. So I went on a bit of a campaign, and I said to anyone that would listen, hey, for my second seat, can we not put me in commercial property, please?
Steer away.
And the time comes around for seat rotations, and my training principal at the time calls me, and he, as soon as I answer the phone, he says, Chloe, please don't hate me. I think, oh, here we go. He says, your second seat is in commercial property. I was like, okay. So we struck up a deal, and he said, if you absolutely hate it, within 3 months, we will move you.
Okay.
We'll sweeten the deal. We'll give you employment as your last seat. So, you know, all being well, you'll qualify into there. Within a fortnight, I was absolutely infatuated with the work that I was doing. I really love problem solving, and I really love work that, you know, has a real life application. And I know all legal work does that. But I think with property, it's really tangible when you're working on deals, particularly, you know, at the time I was working in my local area. So I knew the lay of the land. I kind of knew what was going on here, what was going on there. And so it was coming up to the Christmas break, and I thought, right, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Deciding where you want to qualify is a big decision. And for all intents and purposes, it's got to be the right decision.
Yeah.
And so I gave myself the Christmas break, and I'm a little bit of a workaholic. And I found myself really missing my work over Christmas. So I came back in the January. So this was January 2024. And I spoke to my training principal and my head of team. And I said, hey, I know this might sound really premature considering a few months ago I was going, please, not commercial property. But actually, please, can I qualify here?
Can I come back?
Can I come back? And we all kind of spoke about what my future would look like. And a decision was made that I would get time to account, I would qualify into commercial property. Obviously, you have to do contentious work when you're on a traditional training contract. So I did an extended seat in commercial property with commercial litigation experience as well.
Okay.
And qualified into commercial property. And then earlier this year, I started a new chapter. Funnily enough, working at a market-leading firm with a market-leading property platform. And I am so incredibly grateful to be around market-leading property lawyers because, you know, 6 months ago, I didn't know probably more than half of what I know now. It's insane. And weirdly, I could not think of anything that I'd rather be doing. You know, I've taken a step from general real estate into residential development. We act for industry leaders within that field. And every single day I am reminded why I love my job. And don't get me wrong, it's so incredibly challenging. It's very, very technical. But the 13, 14-year-old that didn't want to do anything but amass knowledge is still very much alive and kicking inside of the 28-year-old that still very much wants to do nothing but amass knowledge. And I think residential development has the perfect combination of real life application, of pragmatic problem solving, of commerciality, of the buzz that you get when you're, you know, working or assisting on a big deal. And I think the fact that I get to do it at Gately is something that I just don't take for granted.
Yeah. You've done a complete 180 then,
I really have.
which is great.
So strange.
Like, I love those kind of stories because it's just good to make sure you're open to everything.
Yes. I think one of the biggest lessons that reinforces itself time and time and time again, you know, from being 21 years old when I first stepped foot in a law firm, walking through those doors thinking, this is all I've ever wanted to do. Oh my goodness, what if I hate it? To being 27 years old and relocating halfway down the country to go and do a completely, you know, yes, a job within the same wider practice area, but a job that actually is quite niche and quite technical and quite specialist. I think keeping an open mind, being someone that seeks out opportunities for growth is probably two of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give to anyone that, you know, is on this journey, and is on this path, because I think that's what has kept me going to get from A to, I wouldn't necessarily say B, because, you know, for me, I want to climb the ladder.
8.1.
8.5. But it's certainly something that's ensured that even on the tougher days, even on the days where I feel less sure of myself, which, you know, for 7 years now, 6.5 years, those days do come. Being able to be open-minded, say yes, stay focused on the overarching objectives, it just means that your experience is more often than not going to become a positive one.
And what do you think in terms of, well, if someone is sat here listening or watching thinking, oh, I never thought about property, what kind of work do you do? Like, if you can give me an example. So who knows, maybe I'll like it.
So I feel like because I was so anti qualifying into property, and obviously, as we've established, I have done a complete 180, I almost kind of feel like I'm a bit giddy when it comes to talking about my work. I absolutely love it. And I know this sounds really cliche, but no 2 days are the same. So obviously, as I mentioned, I do residential development, which means predominantly I am working with senior lawyers on transactions for house builders. I'm in Gately's land acquisition team, which, as I mentioned, is market leading. So the quality of work is insane. This week, we're on Tuesday. I have done several reports, one on quite a large transaction, some on contract documents like development agreements. We do work where we sell parcels to housing associations, which again, I kind of love, because social housing, solving the housing crisis, making housing more affordable kind of gives that job satisfaction, knowing that, you know, in the wider context, you are playing a very small part in solving those problems. Last week, I completed on a lease, lots and lots of drafting, lots and lots of due diligence, lots of reporting. I would say if you're someone that likes solving problems, that thinks about things quite logically and quite pragmatically, then your skills are suited to property law. Some days you have a puzzle and you need to spend hours and hours solving that puzzle, and you're looking for that one golden puzzle piece, that one key to unlock a problem that you've been trying to solve for weeks and weeks. It's very collaborative as well, and I think that's one of the things that I love about where I am now is the collegiate environment. Yeah, and it's really strange. A lot of people do say that at most law firms, the property lawyers are actually the most fun.
Really?
I would say in my team that definitely rings true. For all the work is challenging, and for all it does kind of scratch every area of your brain looking for that academic challenge, I do genuinely have really good days at work.
We love that. That's what we want. That's what we want to hear. Just moving on slightly now.
Yeah.
I want to talk about stereotypes of women in law. Sometimes we can be branded, I think, as maybe too soft or too glamorous. I think it's a lot less now. I think it's a lot better than it was. How do you, as someone who's got pageant history, do you ever get that? Or if you do, how do you challenge it? Or do you think it's pretty much, you know, dead and gone now?
I don't think that it's dead and gone, but I think actually there's a spectrum here. And sometimes, and I'm not going to wave a big brush and paint a blanket statement, but I think sometimes as women in white collar professions, or as women full stop, we are either too much of one thing and not enough of the other thing, or if we are the other thing, we're not enough of the first thing. So for example, I am very much a glam girly. I spent 10 years of my life in pageants. I have always been obsessed with fashion, with clothes, with dressing up. And I love kind of injecting that into my day to day. I always feel like I am at my most productive when I'm at my most put together.
Yeah.
Apart from on my work from home days. we can edit that out. But equally, I think at the other end of the spectrum, you have women in professions that are labelled too masculine and they lean into their masculine energy. But to them, they might be portraying themselves in the way that they most feel comfortable, the way that I, portray myself in the way that I most feel comfortable. And I'm very much the type of person that, don't judge a book by its cover. And I have a great example of this, and I'm sure she won't mind me talking about this. A former colleague of mine joined my previous firm. She now doesn't work there, same as me, and we have a fantastic working relationship. She was one of my work mums. And I don't shy away from the fact that I competed in beauty pageants, that, I enjoy having a bit of a social media presence, and that I am very much a girly girl. It's all over my LinkedIn. And she had said to me that she thought that I was a little bit of a bimbo before getting to know me.
Sorry.
And again, I think because of my time in pageants, you learn to take comments like that, water off a duck's back. But again, I just think, let's stop. We are in 2025. The way that women express themselves is ultimately their prerogative. As long as, professionalism remains the number one priority, as long as they're, working within the lines of, what they're able to do in terms of their firm, brand guidelines, solicitors within the constraints of the SRA, etc., then how they choose to go about their business, how they choose to kind of compose themselves, how they hold themselves is their business. The fact that I am glam and girly certainly doesn't make me a bimbo. The fact that, someone, a woman, a female partner is quite direct, takes control, is a commanding presence in a meeting room, doesn't make her masculine. I just think now's the time that we stop judging people based on appearances, that we look at what people do, the work that they produce, the personality that they bring, and the diversity that they bring to an organization. Because at the end of the day, if we both were exactly the same, this conversation would be so boring. If I was the same as all of the women in my team, then we'd just be like cardboard cutouts of one another. And how do you bounce ideas off each other if you're not on different wavelengths sometimes? How do you take inspiration from, personality traits that other people have, or the way that other people express themselves, if you're just trying to be the same? So I think, let's stop policing the way that we live our lives.
Yeah.
And actually, I know, again, it sounds quite cliche and it's very Miss Congeniality and world peace, but instead of looking down on differences, start celebrating them. Start seeing them as ways that we contribute to society and to the firms that we work in, to the universities that we attend, to the tapestry of their community in a positive way.
How do you think that you can embrace your own individuality without compromising professionalism?
That's a really good question. I think it lends itself to what I was saying previously, in that, as professionals, aspiring professionals, it's all about being live to the codes of conduct, the regulations, the rules of which we do have to abide, to put it bluntly. Using fashion as an example, and I think it is a really good example, you will see on social media there are lots of trends about being a quote unquote office siren, and some of the outfits I really don't think are appropriate for a professional setting. I express myself through my my clothing every single day, and in the back of my mind I do think, well, you are a solicitor, you are a lawyer, there are standards that you need to uphold. And I think that is the way that I try to live my life. I think there's a big wide world out there, and there are lots and lots of different ways in which we as individuals express ourselves and express our individuality. I think there are enough ways to do that without compromising professionalism and professional integrity. Because at the end of the day, now that social media has made us as individuals so much more accessible, you are a brand ambassador even after 5:30, you know, even on a Saturday and on a Sunday. And I think it's really, really important to bear that in mind.
Yeah, you always represent where you're coming from.
Exactly.
How do you see the future of women in the legal profession?
I have goosebumps. I am so incredibly excited for the future of women in the legal profession. I think generationally, this generation that's coming up now, excites me so much. People like yourself, people that will be listening to this podcast, that will be engaging with content on social media, because actually they're seeking out role models outside of the four walls of their firm. They're looking at ways to express themselves. They're looking at ways to develop their commercial awareness outside of the norm. They're looking at opportunities to upskill outside of, you know, such and such vacation scheme. My most favorite thing in the entire world is when I get a message from a former Miss Teen blah 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 saying, Chloe, I've seen what you've been doing over however many years. I'm thinking about applying for a legal role. Can you look over my CV? Of course, without question, I will do that. It's 9 p.m. at night, and I will sit with my cup of hot chocolate, and I will review your CV and your cover letter, and I will help. And I actually think that attitude of wanting to pay it forward, I'm not alone in acting like that. I know so many of my female peers that are insanely passionate about making this path just that little tiny bit easier for the next generation, and so forth and so forth. And I think we are going to, at some point, you know, we've reached parity in terms of the number of women entering the profession and the number of women that are qualifying as solicitors. I think it's really, really exciting to see now the women that are really quite single-minded about wanting to have it all, in terms of they want to climb the corporate ladders, they want to be partners, but they also want to have exciting lives outside of work, perhaps families, etc. And I think actually organizations now are live to that. And, you know, over time, by the time perhaps I get to being a partner in many, many years to come, I'd love to see a bit of a seismic shift in how, you know, firms' infrastructure operates to make the profession, you know, more female friendly. But I do think we are well on our way to that, you know, globally. And that excites me, because I think a diverse legal profession is a better legal profession. And as women, we're a part of that.
Yeah, well said. I want to do something a little bit more fun now.
Okay.
You
put me to task. I've had a hard day.
We've got a quick fire.
Okay, let's go.
It doesn't have to be as, you know, super quick, but it's in the name. Quick fire.
Quick fire, Chloe, stop.
Quick fire. 10 minutes later.
I want to go home.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Most glamorous legal event you've attended?
So there's probably two that spring to mind.
Okay.
The first one was when I met Charles Dance, who plays Tywin Lannister. I don't know if you have ever seen Game of Thrones.
Oh, Game of Thrones guy. Okay, how did that happen?
So this was a massive pinch me moment. And in fact, yes, do you know what? This absolutely takes the crown. So earlier this year, my uni hosted their alumni dinner, and it was held at Gray's Inn, which again, on the theme of girl power, was Lady Hale's Inn of Court.
Baroness Hale.
So I walked through the doors and I was like, oh my goodness, the inner child inside of me is doing backflips and cartwheels. And I'm someone that never did gymnastics, so that's quite a bold statement. And we were having dinner, and all of a sudden Charles Dance turns up, and you know, like many of the listeners, I hope, I binged Game of Thrones during COVID, and I think bar the last season, it is probably one of the best things I've ever seen on TV ever.
Wow. Okay.
And he said I looked fantastic. And I thought, my life is made.
Oh my God. Okay.
My life is made.
He spoke and he complimented you.
He spoke and he complimented me.
I mean, he definitely was referring to the hair as well.
As you know, as a northerner, my loyalties lie with the Starks, obviously, but Tywin Lannister, that's it. My life was made.
Wow. So that's quite a good one. That's a brilliant one. That beats all of mine, I would say. This is a good one, if I do say so myself. Who's more intimidating, a legal judge or a pageant judge?
Pageant judges, oh my goodness.
Really? That is so interesting.
It's, you know, in a job interview, you've got at least half an hour. You've got the opportunity to build rapport. If you stumble, it's okay. You've got time to recover. You've got time to have a sip of water, and you've got time to consider your question and then obviously subsequently your answer. In a pageant interview, you've got 3 to 5 minutes. You've not got time to stumble.
No.
If you do, you've got to recover like that. You've got to scan a panel that can be up to, 6 judges in person and then 4 are online, so you can't even see them to build up a relationship with them in such a brief period of time. So I think it's
pageant.
It's different in that they're only ever going to ask about you. You can really lead a pageant interview. You can really steer it in the direction that you want it to go in if you're clever with your answers. Whereas obviously a job interview is a little bit more prescriptive. There are going to be markers that your interviewers are going to want to see that you hit. But I would say pageant interviews are so much harder.
Go on. This is similar. What's worse, your training contract interview or assessment centre, whatever you sort of did, or Miss Universe interviews and assessments?
Do you know what? I actually really loved my Miss Universe Great Britain interview because it was quite challenging. Some of the questions that you could be asked are quite philosophical.
Oh, really?
One of the questions I remember was, when do you know is the right time to speak, and when do you know is the right time to listen? And again, you've got 30 seconds to answer that.
30 seconds?
Yeah,
wow.
If that. So I had lots of fun with that interview. I'd prepared, I'd spent months preparing for that moment. I didn't do a traditional training contract interview. As I said, my placement year I kind of treated like it was a 15-month long interview. But again, when I interviewed at Gately this spring, I had so much fun, both on my Teams interview and at my face-to-face interview. It's such a pleasant experience. So I actually can't choose, is what I'm trying to say. And then a quick fire question and answer round that's taken me 10 minutes to respond.
Last one. Do you prefer working late or working early? Can I guess?
Yeah.
I'm going to say working late.
Yeah.
Guessing.
I am so not a morning person. So I don't have a commute to work anymore, which is the best thing ever.
Oh, that's great.
I was driving in my previous life about an hour there and an hour back every day.
Takes out of you, doesn't it?
6-minute walk.
Oh my God,
so
6 minutes.
In my mind, I'm kind of like, even if I stay late in the office, and I get home and I might do a little bit later on in the evening. Some days I still will finish earlier than previously, but I'm such a night owl. Like, I have to watch a little bit of TV before I go to sleep just to kind of switch my brain off. So some days I'm awake until like gone midnight, and my alarm will go off at 6:37, and then it's like struggle to the kettle, make the coffee, etc. Brain is in gear by the time I leave the flat, but working time, I will work into the night. I'm like so productive in the evening. I
feel like I'm in a weird space. I'm like productive between like 11 and 2. That's it. That chunk of the day. That's the end of our quickfire.
Oh my goodness.
No. And that's the end of our episode. Is there anything you want to address or speak about before we close off?
Oh, a million. I could sit and talk to be honest.
We've got time if you want to add in some off the cuff.
Yeah, let's do some off the cuff.
Okay, cool.
So obviously we've spoken quite a lot about my time in beauty pageants, and that is a subject that I kind of know like the back of my hand after so many years competing. But I think one of the biggest takeaways and one of the biggest ways that I do think it lends itself to the legal profession is understanding that your experience does not have to come from traditional places. Law firms nowadays are looking for well-rounded candidates. They are looking for people that, in years to come are going to have the propensity to go out and build relationships with clients, win work, represent the brand and the business within the industry in which, your firm operates in. So a lot of my experience and a lot of my transferable skills hasn't come from legal work experience. I was exceptionally fortunate to do my placement year and for everything to fall into the timeline that it did thereafter. But before that, I had ad hoc work experience. I was lucky enough to get onto Pathways to Law because I come from a working class family and I did very well at GCSE. But other than that, nothing. I didn't have any of my own connections. I didn't have people that my parents could call that could slot me in for a couple of days work experience here and there. But what I did have was determination and the ability to contextualize everything else that made me different and that made me me and that I could transpose into that legal setting. So I think for the listeners that are listening to this podcast and they've got that big old question mark over their heads and they're thinking, oh my goodness, how on earth do I secure legal work experience? Yes, it's great on a CV. Yes, it adds to your employability, but so do so many other things.
Yeah,
if
completely.
You play sports, if you have hobbies, if you run marathons or you do high rocks or you own a cake baking business or you do social media marketing on the side, if you work whilst you study, again, all of these different sets of circumstances are gold if you know how to contextualize them. So I think that's probably one of the best pieces of advice that I could give.
I think I would have needed to hear that as well when I was, because you know what I did when I was 17. I asked the same partner of this high street firm for work experience 5 times till he gave it to me because I was
We'd love to see determination.
We love to see a determined young queen, because I was so hung up on the fact that I need legal work experience. I need legal work experience. Like, I wish I'd have, had something like that to say, actually, no, don't worry too much about that. Focus on what you have got or what you're doing right now.
Exactly. And, when I interviewed for my placement year role, we actually spent most of the time talking about the skills that I'd gained and that I'd developed through my part-time waitressing job. Because again, working in hospitality is not for the faint-hearted.
It's not for the weak, let me tell
really
you.
Not for the weak. And those kind of skills, they stick with you for life.
Yeah.
And especially at junior level, I came in as a very entry-level paralegal, but from the off, I had client contact, I had stakeholder contact, and let's call a spade a spade. Sometimes you have unhappy people on the end of the phone, and you need to be able to think quickly on your feet. At that point in my career, I was not the one that was, able to solve the problem, but I could do my best to diffuse it. And it was exactly the same set of skills that, I'd be working an open close, and perhaps service would be slow. I've got a family of 5. They're really unhappy. I can't do anything about it. I'm not the one taking, discounts off the bill or, getting free food out or anything like that. But you approach the situation, you diffuse the situation, and then you go and talk to your superior about it, and they will go and solve it. And at that point in my career, and even now, if something happens, if we encounter a problem as a junior lawyer, identifying that problem and approaching someone that can actually help is a really important skill to have. And I started learning those skills in Italian restaurants, in Primark, in coffee shops, in shoe shops, like all of the different retail and hospitality hats you can wear, I definitely wore. But as a lawyer, I rely on those skills every day.
Yeah, I've never heard of it put like that. And that is, that's amazing how because I've just thought about that for myself. And it's so true.
It's like a muscle. Obviously, your communication skills, they grow, and you're working on them all the time. So you're always developing and you're always growing. But I never, ever forget the foundation to those skills and actually where I started out. And my first ever job was, I think, sampling pretzels in our shopping centre. So I think I just turned 16. And obviously the key is to drum up business by offering free samples.
Of course.
And you have to go and you have to speak to everyone. And that's exactly the same as, going to a networking event where absolutely no one.
Networking, selling pretzels are two in the same.
12 years later, I'm still that 16-year-old, like,
selling my pretzels.
Okay, brilliant. I need to talk to you. How am I going to do that? And being able to kind of lean on that confidence that you recognizing that you do have that confidence in you and that you do have those skills in you. They just might have come from non-traditional means, but embrace them and then start developing them and building on them and working on them. And, years down the line, you'll still be using them, but you then become, and by no means do I brand myself as this, one day in the future maybe, but you start to become a bit of like an expert communicator, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the more you do stuff, the more you do something, the better you'll get at
exactly.
it. Practice makes perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to me.
No, thank you for having me.
I have been so excited to have you on. I literally, since we organised it, I was like, oh my god, Chloe's coming on the pod.
No, I am so excited. And like, I've been talking about this at work, and I think it's hugely, hugely positive. There's so many ways and so many resources now that aspiring lawyers or aspiring professionals, particularly aspiring female professionals, can seek inspiration. And I think what you guys are doing is so, so special. So
thank you, Chloe.
So happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. And for anyone who doesn't know or doesn't follow you at the moment, where can they find you?
Instagram, TikTok, and the love of my life, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.